a couple sensitive topics. So inshallah, hopefully we can zoom out a little bit. And we're just going to go over the topics that we talked about last time. So first, it was, well, before that, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before that, it was basically laying out the different kinds of bir, right? So the different kinds of bir. And we said what bir was a form of humility and akhlaq. It's actually the highest level of morality. Il-bir is the highest level of morality, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mainly talked about bir in the Quran when he talked about dealing with parents. Only once he actually talked about bir relating to the relationship with the non-Muslims that are not combatants, right? Those are not, that are not making any type of military or even harm to the Muslims, which is in Surah Al-Mumtahina. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا ينهاكم الله على الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم. That's in Surah Al-Mumtahina, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forbid you from acting or dealing dealing with those that did not fight you for your deen. In other words, they're not harming you or attacking your deen. And they did not expel you out of your countries, أن تبروهم, that you would actually have a form of bir, a form of good morality, dealing in justice and dealing kindly with them. وتقسطوا إليهم, and act in justice. And of course, the ayah didn't say أن تولوهم. The difference between تولوهم and تبروهم is a very important difference, because تبروهم is actually dealing justly and kindly with the person, but تولوهم is actually taking them as the leaders, as the authority, and that's where it becomes problematic. Because what we're seeing right now is that many times people would actually say, well, we're supposed to respect the laws of the land, and not recognize that respecting the laws of the land should not go beyond respecting and considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on top of all. Nothing goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing goes beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's authority. Nothing. Not any law, not any rule. At the end of the day, is that we would basically have il-bir, not il-walaya, not il-walaya. So now looking at that, laysa al-birra. So now well, basically within Surah Al-Baqarah, we were going into il-bir, and it was talking about the highest level of bir is basically il-iman billah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's your focal point of knowing haqq, of knowing truth, of knowing the right things, and defining your purpose in life. Believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-yawm al-akhir, day of judgment, al-malaika, the angels, al-kitab, basically the Quran, the prophets and the messengers, and of course, and then it talks about dealing with other than il-ghayb. Now we're talking about dealing with people, giving people to the relative, giving the kindness, and of course being kind in wealth with the relatives and the orphans and the needy and those that were basically cut off from their resources of provision, and of course those that were the slaves, and of course then it goes, and this is really important to recognize, that it was basically laying out the most important deeds, and then of course considered that connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the core of bir, and then it went into laying out the different types of bir in terms of relationship with people, and of course then it went into laying out the foundations of justice. So it's not enough to lay out the foundation of justice in terms of theory and what makes justice, but there has to be a consequence for those that get off track, especially when it harms people's deen, people's lives, people's mind, people's chastity, and people's wealth. So that's why Al-Ayah was laying out the different consequence for those that were not disciplined by the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's the discipline in where the government itself is supposed to take responsibility to correct those that were not corrected by discipline and by aqeedah. All right? Those that were not corrected by their aqeedah, were not disciplined by their heart, then therefore the government would come in and actually take force and make sure that that discipline is actually put in place to make sure people's rights, people's lives, people's rights pertaining to the different elements that relate to people's minds, religion, chastity, of course, right? So let's do it in order. Deen, D-N-A-I-M. Good. Deen, their nafs, lives. Well, there are differences of opinions between scholars which one comes first. So that's okay. Al-ard is basically their chastity and family. Aql is mind, and mal. Mal is wealth. Those are basically the order in where social justice or even justice and akhlaq is basically the vertebra for that. So that's why even when you see it in the Quran, you see it most of the times actually coming in that order to lay out the foundation of the vertebra of what makes stability and creates stability in the society, and what creates justice within the society is basically to lay out the foundations within the discipline in the mind first. But then if the mind is not disciplined, then the government has to intervene to make sure that people are actually following the orders and making sure that people are following the orders. That's why the ayah said, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِصَاصُ فِي الْقَتْلِ. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِصَاصُ فِي الْقَتْلِ. We talked about that last time. And of course, we mentioned that it was basically laying out equality between the lives of people. And of course, when we lay out the equality, we're talking about equality in terms of the things that people are equal in. The lives, a man's life is equal to a woman's life. All right. But when it comes to authority and responsibility, he's got a certain responsibilities and she's got certain responsibilities, and so forth. All right. So then it basically laid out وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتُ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, whether we're talking about al-qisas to mean the consequence, the punishment for those that get off track. And we talked about in detail about al-qisas, and we talked about in detail of the punishment and the different types of punishments and how they're laid out in the Quran. We talked about that. And then, of course, people's wealth, even when they die, we talked about that in detail. And we talked about will, we talked about the different types of will. We also talked about siyam. So now we're actually in the category of siyam. We talked in detail about siyam. So why was it talking about al-birr and the siyam, and it talked about al-qisas? Why? Well, here's a number of different things. Number one is that birr is all about disciplining oneself. What does it mean to discipline oneself? To discipline oneself actually means to hold some form of restraint. All right. But holding some form of restraint is actually based on 4 different elements in terms of akhlaq. Number one, that's justice. Understanding what justice is, understanding what it means to apply akhlaq, understanding what are ethics, what is morality. That's justice. Number 2 is sabr. There's no way that you can actually have akhlaq unless you have some form of restraint. Unless that restraint basically means you have to somehow have some form of a challenge. There is on the inside some form of, yes, I want to do it, but there's the sabr in where you are putting yourself in some form of restraint, some form of disciplining yourself, some form of containment in order to contain your behavior from exceeding the limits of principle to actually living the value and living the principle, in where you're actually looking at it from the lens from getting the benefit of within dunya to wanting the benefit in akhirah. So that's for the sabr. Number 3, al-iffa. Al-iffa, which basically is, talked about it, chastity, whether it's chastity or whether it's satisfaction, patience with it, coming with it. And finally, courage. There's no way that you can actually live akhlaq unless you actually have the courage to stand up to live the akhlaq. So we mentioned that one. Now, having that being said, for those that, when we're talking about birr, for those that couldn't live the birr, there is al-qisas. There's the government intervention. For those that want to further learn more about living the birr, there's a siyam to help the people live that discipline, that training. All right? The training in akhlaq, the training in discipline. كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم. And of course, this isn't something new. This isn't a recent discipline, but this was actually the discipline that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout history had ordered people to live through as a form of discipline, as a form of training in what? As a form of training in al-birr. As a form of training in al-birr. What does al-birr have to do with the beginning of the surah? Al-hidayah is in 2 forms. Amanu wa amilu salihat. Al-hidayah, why are we talking about hidayah? Because in the beginning of the surah, it was based alif lam mim, ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. So هدى للمتقين, those are the main 2 poles in Surah Al-Baqarah. It's laying out what it means to live hidayah and what it means to live taqwa. So now it's telling you, all right, well, speaking of taqwa, there's the level of al-birr, and this is what it means to maintain taqwa, to maintain birr. This is what it means to actually correct and make sure that the society is also corrected in hidayah and birr. Got it? Now, so that's why the ayah will continue to actually lay out further discipline, further ways to induce birr and induce hidayah and taqwa, which is in Islam. We talked about Islam, ayyam ma'dudat, to encourage them. They're not used to actually living in holding themselves from eating, drinking, and of course, sexual relations, even if that actually meant a couple of hours. But that was for a whole month. Ayyam ma'dudat, we went into details about that, and then Shahr Ramadan, and in order to encourage them, Shahr Ramadan, in where it's the month of Ramadan that was basically the month that the Quran was revealed in. Again, Hudan linnas, connecting it with the beginning of the surah. Remember, Hudan linnas. That's in order to connect you with, well, what does it mean to live the taqwa? It actually means to get a certain discipline. It actually means to live a certain principle. It actually means to do lots of training. How do I train? Siyam is one of the methods for training. One of the methods for training on what? On the 4 methods, on the 4 principles of akhlaq. The 4 principles of akhlaq: understanding birr, justice; 2, sabr; 3, iffa; 4, shaja'a. Right? So those are the 4 different things. So here the ayah is basically laying out, well, here's the Quran contained the justice, bayinat min al-huda, contained more details on how to live the justice for sabr, wal furqan, to give you more details on justice. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ, there's the sabr, learn the sabr. فَلْيَصُمْ وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ, if you're ill, etc. What is that? Containing iffa. فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ, live it. You can right now go through that constrainment. You'll pass it on, you'll make it up at another time. يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. الشجاعة ولتكملوا العدة. شجاعة, and if you will complete the days of fasting, the rest of the month of Ramadan, شجاعة. That's living month of Ramadan by living the 4 different elements of akhlaq. So that's where when the ayah continues to actually tell us about al-birr, and then it continued to tell us about al-siyam, to tell us that's a form of discipline. And that's the same thing. One beautiful thing about Sufiya and Tasawwuf is that there is this shaykh that will actually mentor the murid to live and do certain sunan. So the sunan, for example, Ashr al-Awakhir or Al-Ashr min Dhil Hijjah will all be fasting. If you couldn't all fast, so what they'll do is that they'll come to the masjid and actually make an iftar together in the masjid for Al-Ashr Dhil Hijjah, just to make sure that for those that can't do it on their own, they'll have a communion, a community to do it together. What else? Al-Ashr min Dhil Hijjah, days where the days of Ashr Dhil Hijjah are actually the day, not the night. But the day of Ashr Dhil Hijjah is actually better than the last 10 days of Ramadan. The last 10 days of Ramadan. But the nights of Ashr, the last 10 nights of Ramadan are better than the nights of Ashr Dhil Hijjah. Got it? Yeah. The night, opposite. But the days are actually better. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ was actually saying that the Ashr min Dhil Hijjah, that if a person were to do the good deeds during the days of Ashr Dhil Hijjah, it would actually be more than going for jihad itself. Than jihad itself. So reading Quran, for example, التسبيح, الذكر, الاستغفار, الدعاء, etc. is actually better than any other days throughout the year. Throughout the year. What about? Sinning? It's not multiplied. شفتي رحمة ربنا? Sin is not multiplied. Sin is still the same. Sin is still the same. But look at this. رحمة رب العالمين. But Rabb al-Alamin will multiply the good deeds. Allah yarhamna wa rahmatuh. All right. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. We mentioned that one. If my servants ask you about me, notice all the different ayat that related to su'al, that related to questioning, asking, answer a question. Tell them such. وَيَسْأَلُكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى. يسألونك عن الأهلة قل هي مواقيت للناس. Say and answer and reply. But this is the only time where the reply, the response actually came directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإني قريب. As I am near. أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان. I respond and I answer the dua of those that make the dua for me. دعوة الداعي when إذا دعان. If they would make the dua. If they would make the dua, they would basically get that privilege of being what? فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, of being near Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just by making dua. You're making the dua. Even if your dua was not answered, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, just by making dua, even if your dua was not answered, you were close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You had the privilege of being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You had the privilege of being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. You'll have your dua answered. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. How to get the dua answered? فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. Obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Answer the call that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling you for. To turn your face towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي. And let them believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. What is لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ? So that they may actually find guidance. What is that connecting us to? That some of the things, what was that? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Exactly. that in order to get to the level of hidayah, here it is. Let's go for the beginning of the surah. ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. Right? What is it? What is it? الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم. Now connecting it with all these details, but these details are giving us the details of the prelude that the surah started out with. So right there, yes.
How does, with discipline, is it just Ramadan fasting sound only, or can you also have, does khalwa play any part of discipline?
Absolutely.
Because let's say I'm recluse, so immediately after I break it, I'm not gonna think about Ramadan.
So
does khalwa, are there steps to?
So what is khalwa? Let me explain khalwa. Khalwa is not always something that you always have to do. Khalwa.
Can you do it for discipline?
Absolutely, you have to do it for discipline at times. You have to. There has to be a khalwa for every single Muslim. There has to be. Khalwa, what is khalwa? Khalwa is basically a moment that you're disconnecting yourself from the people. You're disconnecting yourself from the people. You're disconnecting yourself from any form of relations, but with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for khalwa, the Prophet ﷺ was practicing khalwa even before he was announced as a prophet. In Ghar Hira, he was doing that khalwa, just a moment of dhikr, just a moment of remembrance, just a moment of getting near. What is remembrance? What is dhikr? Dhikr is in four different types. There's a dhikr, there's the visual dhikr, there's the oral dhikr, there's the behavioral dhikr, and there's the audio dhikr. You're listening. And part of the khalwa, in where you're just taking a moment of disconnecting yourself and you're recognizing part of the different things that you do in khalwa. Number one, there's the dhikr, visual dhikr. يتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. What does that take them into recognition? ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا. O Lord Almighty, you have not created all this in absurdity. What does it bring them to recognizing? Recognizing their submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it do? That is the behavioral dhikr. The visual dhikr took them into the oral dhikr. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. What does that oral dhikr bring them to? The behavioral dhikr. Ibadat for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ubudiyya for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where you're only living the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your behavior. What does that let the person do? It creates a certain environment. Who are you listening to? What are you listening to? And that's why that in Surah Al-Qasas, what about them? That إِذَا سَمِعُوا اللَّغْوَ, even if they hear اللغو, what do they? أَعْرَضُوا عَنْ. They would basically stay away from it. Not that they were in Surah Al-Mu'minun, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ, that they would actually abstain from اللغو. But this one's even farther. No, إِذَا سَمِعُوا اللَّغْوَ, even if they just hear it, they don't even surround themselves, even if they're not engaging with al-laghu. What is al-laghu? Al-laghu is any type of an ill talk. What is ill talk? Haram speech, whether that contained, let's call them bad words, damning, complaining, speaking about people, speaking in people's reputation, harming people, speaking of haram things that you shouldn't be talking about, or speaking, to be more specific, speaking of any type of a language that's inviting or inducing wrong behavior. And that includes the Prophet ﷺ. ليس المؤمن بالطاعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. A believer is not ta'an, is not constantly speaking ill about people and backbiting them. ولا اللعان, and is not damning others or constantly complaining to damn the situation. Even the situation doesn't damn it. And then ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء, and does not speak of things that are supposed to be private, speak it in a way that is exposing it. ولا البذيء. Even if they were to use the bathroom, they don't speak of things that are supposed to be private, things that are supposed to be disgusting. Speak of it in a way that is exposing it. And that's why, because it's not just harming the people around you with this type of low talk. It's harming your deen. It's harming your akhlaq. It's harming you. It's harming your heart. It's harming your mind. It's polluting you by polluting your mind. Your tongue, your ears, your mind, your behavior will all become polluted. Go ahead, my dear. If it reduce the relationship, if they can't understand on how to maintain their akhlaq, reduce the relationship. If you still give them nasiha, but they still insist on living those low akhlaq, reduce the relationship. In the end, even Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, what happened? What did he do? When he recognized that he was not accepting haqq, أعرض عنه. He just left him. That's it. That's it. Time for me to go.
Lahwi is heedlessness.
No, illahu literally actually means the sounds that birds make.
This is not lahwi, but it's lahwi.
I'm explaining it. Illahu, the sounds that birds make, but illahu is actually not, this is, part of the meanings, but it's basically the words that don't necessarily have any benefit for. They don't have any benefit. People are just saying them. There's no benefit. They're just basically just talking for the sake of talking. That's why المزاح in Arabic, it's called مزاح لأنه زاح صاحبه عن الحق. What does that mean? المزاح, muzah is when a person's constantly joking. So in Arabic, the root is zaha. The word zaha, just like in Surah Al-Imran, زحزح عن النار وأدخل الجنة فمن زحزح عن النار وأدخل الجنة. What is زحزح? زحزح means to move something, but you're slipping it, and there's a gravity that you're trying to take it away. You're trying to push it out. That's زحزح. But the word زحزح actually comes from the root zaha, and zaha actually means to slide something. Right? So il-muzah was actually called, which is basically when a person's constantly joking, it's basically because it slips them away from truth, away from honor, away from akhlaq. Some people just make jokers of themselves, not recognizing. Give yourself honor. Give yourself some dignity. Too much joking, too much laghu, even if it's not necessarily in harm, too much laghu. You only have one mouth. You're either going to say good or you're going to say wrong, but you're basically going to say nothing. What I mean by nothing, useless talk. So that's il-laghu. Il-laghu is basically useless talk. Is basically talk that doesn't have any sensibility to it, any meaning, any value to it. That's il-laghu. Get me Hudayfa, please. Don't worry, I know how to deal with him. I'll get my son, and my son will tell him to calm down. لعلهم يرشدون. Now it goes into more details. أحل لكم ليلة الصيام حذيفة. Miles, because we're recording, we need to let your tone down lower, okay? All right. You guys can play, but don't make it loud.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
Yep, you can go, but don't make it loud, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Jazakallah khair. You can take that and you can play with it outside. That's okay.
We're gonna play.
Okay.
We're gonna play. We're gonna play.
Good job. I love that one. All right. You know, speaking about I love that boy, I had I think I mentioned the story. I had one of my students was only 5 years old, but mashallah, he could write. Very smart boy. So he would come to me every single time with a note and with hearts on it. Love, Sister Aysha, Saad, and Sister Aysha. So I told him, I said, oh, my husband's going to be really jealous if he would see, you know, Saad loves Aysha. He's really going to be jealous. But I'll keep it, but I don't know what to do about this. So the following week, he came to me and he brought me a note. Love, Mrs. Husband, and Saad. So now Mrs. Husband just wanted to make sure that my husband doesn't get brokenhearted, you know. Wanted to make sure that my husband doesn't misunderstand the relationship between me and Saad. So he'll put him in the picture. Allah yahmi ya Rabbi. MashaAllah, very smart boy. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُم. Now, of course, since it's talking about Ramadan, so it actually wanted to put in more details of how do we actually live the discipline in Ramadan. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُم. Now, I'll first translate the ayah, all right? Translate the ayah, and then I'll explain the details in it. It is permissible to you on the nights of siyam, on the nights of fasting, that you would be intimate with your wives. They are garments to you, and you are garments to them. Your Lord Almighty knew that you were تختانون أنفسكم, that you were constraining yourself or transgressing certain limits, and your Lord Almighty had accepted the repentance on you, and he had forgiven you. So now, be intimate with them and seek what Allah Almighty had granted you, and eat and drink until you would recognize the white line from the black line from dawn, and then complete your fast until the night. And do not be intimate with them when you are practicing i'tikaf, which are moments, we're going to talk about it, moments of being in seclusion in the masjid. Those are the limits of the Lord Almighty, so do not transgress them. Those are the signs of the Lord Almighty, that he clarifies them for you or clarifies them for people so that they may reach the level of taqwa. Got it? Simple, right? But there's actually a lot more to learn from this ayah than this, I would say, shallow in surface interpretation. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ. The nights of fasting are basically permissible to you. الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُم. Now, الرَّفَث actually it doesn't mean to be intimate, by the way, because rafath actually means to speak of intimacy, to speak of any type of speech that basically leads to arousal. إِلَى نِسَائِكُم. So what does that mean? So a number of different things. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying uhilla. So what was it? Was it forbidden before that they would actually be intimate with their wives throughout the whole month of Ramadan? Differences of opinions between scholars on that. Are you guys understanding the idea? Was it that they were not allowed throughout all Ramadan to be intimate with their wives until the end of Ramadan? In other words, not even during the night, day and night? Or was it some confusion that some Sahaba were living in, thinking that they were not allowed to be intimate all Ramadan and then they didn't know that during the night that it was permissible. All right. Differences of opinions between scholars. I'll just make the story short. So that's why they actually had differences of interpretations, because the ayah says, "Uhilla lakum." Was that bringing in an abrogation to a previous ruling, or was that laying out clarification on a ruling that already was there? What does the word abrogate mean? The word abrogate actually means to change the law that was previously laid out. And we know in Islam that the laws of Islam were not sent down altogether. It was gradually sent down. It was a gradual process. It wasn't entirely all revealed all together, and all the rulings were laid out here. And that's why even in da'wah, you don't want to lay out all the rulings all together. Little by little, little by little, you can't change. The Prophet ﷺ actually says, "Inna hadha ad-deen mateen, fa'awghilu fihi birifq." This religion, it's a solid religion. If you want to go into the religion, awghilu fihi birifq, enter it gently. Why? Because he explains it in another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-munbat la ardan qata wa la dhahran abqa." What does that mean? The Prophet ﷺ actually said in another hadith that a person, if they're going on a, let's say, we've got a journey to pass, they've got an area, a destination to get to. But if a person would have, let's say, a camel or any animal's back that they're riding on, and then they force the animal to rush to get to the destination, the animal is basically going to get overexhausted and might possibly die in the middle of the way. What's going to happen if they die in the middle of the way? Then they're not going to have a living transportation. And they certainly did not reach their destination. And that's why لا ظهرا أبقى ولا أرضا قطع, لا أرضا قطع ولا ظهرا أبقى. And that's the same thing. In where, why did I get to this one?
You're explaining why they cannot.
أحل. Exactly. So when we speak about النسخ, there are two types of ayat. There's المنسوخة and there's المحكمة. What does that mean? In naskh, it means to abrogate. So some of the rules that you might actually find in the Quran were actually mansukha. What does that mean? They were abrogated. Later ayat were revealed and actually changed the ruling because they were in the process of learning Islam. Let's give abrogate. Naskh, I can't, changing the ruling, but it's not really changing the ruling. So the word is abrogation. So to abrogate actually means in naskh, and that's why I'm using the word changing the ruling. So I'll give the example for drinking alcohol. The Arab were so obsessed. So what is the word? The other word? Addicted to drinking, that they, in fact, the poetry, if it didn't contain drinking and women friendship and all the girl friendship and all that stuff, the poetry would not necessarily pass. Their poetry, it always would start out with speaking about women. That was the poetry. That was the good poetry. It would first start talking about women, and it depends on what kind of poetry you're talking about. It can go from speaking about, a name that they might actually invent to a name that they might really have a relationship with. But then they might actually go further. Even in Mu'allaqat al-Sab'. What are Mu'allaqat al-Sab'? Mu'allaqat al-Sab' are considered the most eloquent 7 poems that the Arab had ever made, to the point that they actually had hung them in the Kaaba. They hung them in the Kaaba. These poems still exist today, not in the Kaaba, but the poems themselves. They exist until today. The physical documentation. Well, not the physical documentation per se, but the actual wording. They have the actual wording until today. They're actually considered the most eloquent poetry. In fact, even if they were to do tafsir in al-ayat, they will say, well, Aysha said this, this, and this, and this in order to explain a terminology or a word in the Quran or a word in the hadith. They would go back to poetry because lugha, the Arabic language, is so eloquent that you can't just invent a meaning, that you actually have to go back to a wording, a poem that used, in other words, a sentence in where it explains the word in those certain vocabularies. And that's why the poetry was there. What was that? Is that what's the pre-Islamic era? The shi'r that they went back to, all the poetry dated until 205 Hijriya. So the poetry until 205 Hijri is used as a reference in order to explain even Quran and Hadith. When we're explaining what? It became like a belief. So when we're talking, and this is not wrong, by the way, okay, so don't get me wrong. So when, for example, the word bashiruhun, all right, we want the word, what does bashiruhun actually mean? So we'll go back to hadith, we'll go back to other ayat in the Quran, and we'll go back to poetry in order to see what that word means. Even Islamic scholars. And why until 205 Hijriya? Check this out. Why until 205 Hijriya? Because that marked the death date of a Shafi'i. So even, you know what, here, this is Tafsir al-Qurtubi, all right? For me to prepare for every class, I would go to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, Tafsir ibn Kathir, Tahrir al-Tanwir, and guess what? If I were to open the books of Tafsir right there, you would see pages and pages. I just randomly opened any page. You see it? They're using right there. Here's a poem. Here's a poem. All these, the ones that are actually coming in stanzas, they're actually poems. So even in the books of tafsir, I'll open any random page and you'll see poems. Any random page and you'll see poems. Because tafsir uses a lot of poetry in order to go back to learn the meanings of the ayat, the meanings of the words. You can't get vocabulary just like that. You have to go back to those that spoke the language to understand what these words are actually saying. And that's why, you know, for those that would read the translation in English, they're missing out on a lot. Because what you're reading is not just the surface, but the very, very, very surface of the surface, the outer crust, the final shell. But there's no way that you can actually go deep. Even the scholars of tafsir, they knew that you can't go deep in the ayat unless you go back to poetry. Is it the same for what? Linguistics? What about linguistics? In Lugha Arabiya, you have, there's no way. If you want to go back to the original Lugha Arabiya, you have to go back to poetry.
But Somali too is poetry. It's actually called the land of poets. So the whole Somali culture, I think it's a nomadic thing because they had animals in the sea a lot. Somalis, the whole land is called Somali, the land of poets, because poetry is a big thing. My mom sits down and just narrates poetry throughout. If she wants to tell me something, she would send me poems. So poetry is a big language.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we speak about abrogation, all right, when we speak about abrogation, we went all the way just to, all right, changing, not, it wasn't changing rules, it was more of a chronology. It was a gradual process in order to come with the final stage of Islamic revelation. All right, so that's why there are some ayat that are mutashabihat, some ayat mansukha, some ayat that are muhkama. What does that mean? Some ayat, you might read them and you might not recognize that, oh, this was actually in the early stages of Islam. And then later on, the final stage was revealed, just like alcohol, in where Arab, like I said, that's what got us into it. Arab were so addicted to drinking that the poetry, that's what got us in there. Poetry was actually, a lot of it was about alcohol, drinking. All right. Now, in the early stages, Islam did not say anything or forbid alcohol. It wasn't until gradually it started, it just gave a hint in Surah Yasin. Gave a hint that there's some of the rizq is good and some of it is not. And then that with alcohol, there's some good and generally it's not good. Then what do you got? It's hinting. There's something that's not right in it. It wasn't until the second stage that don't drink. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. Don't get near salah. In other words, don't pray while you're drunk. So they used to drink at night. They're so addicted to it. They would drink at night. And then they started questioning, well, does Allah want us to drink or not? Why did this happen all of a sudden? That's when the ayah, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, when it was finally revealed. Are you finished now? You want to know what the ruling is? There is some khair in it, but this is all harm. Harms the society, harms the individuals, harm in the money. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. And that's when the Sahaba would spill all the alcohol and to the point that they were seeing rivers and rivers of flowing alcohol in the streets. What happened? It was فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Just one word. Didn't need muhadara, didn't need anything. That's it. Didn't need any explanation. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Are you finished now? Yes. انتهينا. That's it.
You're done.
You're done.
So the donkey story, it's like they did not break the donkey, they made it rest. Because you used that example of the horse that needed to rest. Otherwise, the horse would die and then the means of transportation.
The reason why I mentioned that one, that it was in the issue of gradual, the gradual process of Islamic revelation. So that's why I said, is this abrogated? Is this laying out a ruling that they were not familiar with? Or is this abrogating a ruling that was there? You see what I'm saying? Remember, there are two different opinions. The first opinion said that it was haram entirely for them, for the Muslims to be intimate with their wives throughout the month of Ramadan, day and night. That's the first opinion. And that this ayah was abrogating that ruling, changing it, and saying, well, during the night, you could actually do it. All right. Now, the second opinion said that no, this is not abrogated. This was actually giving details for those that didn't know how to practice the ruling right. And they thought that all Ramadan, they shouldn't be intimate with their wives. So that the ayah, for those scholars, they said this is actually clarifying it for those that didn't understand it right. And that's why it said, Laylat as-Siyam, that you could actually be intimate with your wives throughout the night. But here's one thing. The word rafath, there's another ayah about rafath. No, ahead, we still didn't get to it yet. When it talks about al-Hajj, فَلَا رَفَثَ وَلَا فُسُوقَ وَلَا جِدَالَ فِي الْحَجِّ. What is الرفث? الرفث is not intimacy. الرفث is actually any speech that is intended to bring about any form of excitement. We're not talking about any excitement. We're talking about arousal. All right. In other words, speech between the husband and the wife, flirtation.
It's not allowed during the day.
Wait, flirtation. Hold on. You have a gene of extremism in you. Hold on, Zamzam. This girl can easily get into being extreme. Habba. All right. So this ayah is basically irrafathu ila nisaikum. The ayah is actually not, you know what? I'll explain it in the ayah after it. All right. So this is speaking about just this talk. So during Hajj, any type of speech, even between the husband and the wife, that contains any form of flirtation is actually haram during Hajj.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
During Hajj. What about during the day of Siyam? All right.
So when you say at the daytime,
Do it daytime. Throughout Hajj, what from the minute you're actually doing your ihram until you do until you are finalized, and from the day that you're actually khalas, do that tahallul, you cannot in between do any type لا رفث ولا فسوق ولا جدال في الحج. No arguing. Zamzam can be hard, but you can't argue with her. At least during Hajj. Right now it's okay.
Hajj is a problem.
Only Hajj is a problem. All right. So Rafath is basically that type of talk. So what about during Siyam? If it is going to lead, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually differentiate between someone that is young and someone that is old. Someone that is young might easily slip. And of course, what's the kafara? The kafara, what is a kafara? An expiation for intimacy during the day of Ramadan, fasting for 60 days. 60 days. Or feeding 60 needy people. You need to learn your lesson. So what is that? How much is that going to be almost? Hold on. So that's almost, let's see, 11, that's almost going to be $700 for just that day. Man, that's more than that wife's dowry.
Are you saying you have to do both, or you can do one?
You can do one.
So you don't have to fast the 60 days?
You pay the kafara. You want to pay the kafara for it. You can.
Even if you're like able bodied?
What? Even if you're
Able to do?
if you're capable, there are differences of opinions between scholars on whether you cannot go to option 2 unless you are incapable of or whether you can go to option 2 even if you're not capable. Differences of opinions between scholars. And why? Because of the hadith, the man that came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, halakt, I'm doomed. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, what happened? He said, I fell on my wife. Notice the adab. He didn't say I was into him. He just said, I fell on my wife. And the Prophet ﷺ said, fast 60 days. And he said, I've got a problem with fasting just these days and I already committed a sin. You want me to fast 60 days? I can't. And he said, fast 60 people. And he said, between these two mountains in Medina, there is no one that is poorer than me. Wallahi ma bayna labatayha afqar minna. You're not going to find anybody between these two mountains that are poorer than me. So what does the Prophet ﷺ do? Brings dates and he says, you know what, here, this is my donation on behalf of you to you and your wife. Take those dates. And that was, to them, that was the only food. Take those dates, you and your wife. Enjoy the meal.
So the 60 days, do you have to do?
Yes, you do.
What if you get your period?
That's an option. That's the only time where that's an exception. When you get your cycle, those are the only days. Yeah, let's skip them. But the rest of the days continue. You skip, you start over.
Now what?
You skip, you say you're going to start over.
You start over. That way, they learn a lesson. I know, it's.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
From zero.
From 0 if you skip a day.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Don't
When
dare.
you get your period,
No, I said period is those period days, that's okay.
Oh, so but if you skip one day, then you have to start all over again.
Yes. Yep.
Know your
Learning
enemies
your
in
lesson.
Learn your lesson. It's a lesson learned. Go ahead.
For both the man and the woman. Yes.
Differences of opinions between scholars. That's a good question. Differences of opinions between scholars on whether it is one for both or is it each one is alone. And then they went into details. What if she was forced and she didn't want to, but she was forced? Said, well, she was forced, she doesn't have to. But it's actually, is it one for both or is it one each? Differences of opinions. I'll just make the story short. All right, so just to mention that one. So, لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. So in other words, be disciplined even throughout the day from doing rafath, from doing any type of a flirtation speech, especially if you cannot contain yourself. Oh, but why? He said, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. Because they are garments to you and you are garments to them. Look at the adab in the Quran. هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ. The ayah didn't want to go further. It just said, well, you're a garment to them and you're both garments to each other. What does that mean? It's like you would cover on each other and you would cover each other's privacies. You're basically to suit one another. What is a garment? Well, a garment is supposed to give you warmth. A garment is supposed to give you warmth. A garment is supposed to cover aura, modesty. A garment is supposed to also give you an identity, right? A garment is supposed to also give you honor, right? It's supposed to give you honor. You go to the hospital, the scrubs and the doctor's garments, they're different. Hijab, it's supposed to give you an honor. That's why ذلك أدنى أن يعرفوا فلا يؤذين. So that would be recognized, as in Surah Al-Ahzab. فلا يؤذين. What are they recognized for? Recognize that they're women of honor, that they're women of principle, that they're women that actually consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principle on top of any other pleasure. Don't mess with them. Not a person that you can mess with. And subhanAllah, they could recognize it. They could recognize it.
You come as a pig in the Iraq, if you don't respect the garment.
What was that?
Is there a hadith that says married couple, if you don't follow the rules of garment, like keep that privacy, you come as a with the pig faces?
A pig faces?
Like the
Pig
face of a pig
faces?
on the day of Qiyamah. Who are the people who come with the faces of pigs? Maybe it's just a story.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Like people who disclose their privacy matters.
Well,
They have
you've got the
punishment for
ayah.
that.
For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. And then فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained who is salihah, who a pious woman is. قانتات حافظات للغيب. And that حافظات للغيب is basically emphasizing a very common thing that women do more than men, which is speak about the privacies within the household. They usually ventilate. All right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here. هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. And in fact, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that he said, do you speak of what happens in your homes? And one of the Sahabiyah, she said, yes, they do. And they even explain what happens. And they even speak about these things. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said that in that hadith, that whoever unreveals what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has covered, that on Judgment Day, they'll actually have a type of la'an. All right, so let's continue here. Hunna libasun lakum, of course. Hunna libasun lakum, wa antum libasun lahun. Hunna libasun lakum. They're garments to you and your garments to them. And that's supposed to in order. So if you want to actually put a punctuation right here, And the punctuation, let's put a punctuation right there. So أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم semicolon. Why? Because they're garments to you. In other words, the A is just wanting to lay it out in a way that is bring in the discipline, bring in the idea. Because at the end of the day, is that you cover, you conceal, you bring modesty, you bring warmth, you basically, you bring in that relationship. In other words, as a salih woman, as a pious woman, and a pious husband, do not uncover, because you are a libas, do not uncover the illnesses of your husband or him, uncover your illnesses, whether that was in behavior or whether that was in speaking about the features. And when we speak about libas, this is, yes, this relates to body, but even the homes are supposed to be areas of privacy. What happens at home, and that's something that we have to teach the kids. Don't tell people mom and dad got in an argument. Don't go and sharing that mom and dad got into an argument. That stays at home. Mom and dad said this and this. You answered the phone. You don't teach the kids what happens and what mom and dad might have said. That stays private. And also teach the kids. The adab, teach the kids, certain things, even as a woman. I know that you want to feel home, you want to dress up as you want, but when your kids reach a certain age, there are certain things that you also still have to cover, because your daughter is learning from you. And your son, they will start to recognize. So you have to keep that adab, keep that manner, keep that modesty, keep the haya, bashfulness within their hearts. Dress in a certain way. Certain types of clothing should not be worn in front of the children, because they will recognize. Keep their akhlaq, keep their haya, even if it's within your home. Even if it's within your home. Why? Because at the end of the day, is that the child is basically going to learn the akhlaq. Between you and your husband, choose certain times, choose certain areas, certain places where you could, even within your home, and even teach the kids the adab. There's isti'dhan. When mom and dad are in the room, you don't have to keep on knocking unless it's an emergency. Teach them the adab, the akhlaq. When mom and dad are alone, don't just barge in. Don't just open the door and come in. Knock before you come in. When mom is alone, dad is alone, knock. Don't just barge in. Ask for adab. When the door is closed, don't just open the door. Or even if the door is open, don't stand right in front of the door. Stand on a side, so that they would learn the adab. And of course, adab and manners actually starts from what you say. Manners start from what you say. علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم. Your Lord Almighty knew that you were, the word is تختانون. What is تختانون? تختانون, does it mean to restrain? Does it mean to transgress? What does it mean that they were somehow trying to restrain themselves, but it was beyond their capacity? And of course, in terms of what? Not in terms of eating and drinking, in terms of their relationship with their wives. And that's why, just like those Sahaba, there were a number of Sahaba that just couldn't help it. They just couldn't help it. And that's why the ayah was actually revealed. It was bringing in the rukhsa. It was bringing in the permissibility after, according to those scholars that said that was abrogated. فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ. So after that change within the ruling, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, of course, all forgiving, فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ, change the ruling, وَعَفَى عَنْكُمْ. What is the difference between التوبة and العفو? التوبة is basically to repent. العفو is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is التوبة? التوبة is to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are 4 conditions to have an accepted tawbah. 4 conditions. Condition number 1 is that you would have to basically regret what you have done. Number 2, after regretting, you seek istighfar. You seek forgiveness from the Lord Almighty. Number 3, you would basically determine that you would not go back to it. It's number 3. Number 4, you would put in good deeds to erase the bad deeds. All right? So all this together actually means what? It puts it in a nutshell that you actually determine to change the environment and the area that's directing you towards that sin. Let's do it again. You're regretting.
Regret it.
Mhm. Make
ask
istighfar.
forgiveness,
Make istighfar.
not to go back.
Determine not to go back,
And you do good deeds.
Then,
and you do good deeds. What are you doing?
erase
You're
the past.
all of it in a nutshell. You're changing your lifestyle from vision. Let's go. Regret it is what? The vision. Istighfar, the sabr. Connected. You see the correlation?
Oh my God.
Good habit,
What?
Repeat it again.
the moral of good conduct.
Of course.
All of them.
Of course. They're related to it. They're related to them.
Okay, say that again.
You guys think of me as autistic. I have to have dots connecting.
That's how I.
You cannot not connect them.
Okay, start again.
Let's start again. What do you do? Regret.
Regret.
What is that? That's the vision of seeing it that it was wrong.
You're doing
So what is
Two.
that now?
justice.
Under the 4 conduct.
Justice.
Justice.
The other,
Hadl.
How did you?
What are you doing? You're regretting. Why? Because your vision started seeing it. Justice is all about recognizing right and wrong. In istighfar, what is that? You're doing istighfar. What are you doing?
you ask for
Where's-
Asking
There you go.
for-
Asking for forgiveness. What are you doing? You're doing practicing sabr.
Stubborn, okay, patient.
All right. Then what? Al-iffa. What are you doing? Determining not to go back.
Go back to.
What are you doing? You're practicing iffa.
Restraining.
Exactly. What are you doing for that? For that, determining not to go back. You're to determine not to go back actually means you're satisfying yourself with the least,
Which is if
right? You're satisfying yourself with the least to get something higher, which is akhirah, which is Jannah. And then finally,
you have to good deeds, which is patience.
which is shaja'ah. Do otherwise. Courage.
Now the opposite
Have
is
the
patience.
courage to change your lifestyle. What are you gonna do? Do good deeds.
So I'm a human being. I repeat the mistake again. So I
We're
start
human
some
beings.
things,
I love it.
I repeat
You know
them.
what? Abu Dhar, listen to this. Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, he tells the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever says, La ilaha illallah, there's no God worthy of worship but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, will enter Jannah. Abu Dhar, وَإِن زَنَى وَإِن سَرَقَ, even if he were to steal and commit adultery, the Prophet ﷺ said, even if he were to steal and commit adultery. And then he said, even if you were to steal and commit adultery, and the Prophet ﷺ said, even if you were to steal and commit adultery, even if you were to steal and commit adultery. So finally the Prophet ﷺ said, رغم أنف أبي ذر, even if Abu Dhar dislikes it. Yes. You know, it's kind of like snapping. The African American way, it's like, whether you like it or you don't, it is what it is. It is what it is. And that's the same thing. The Prophet ﷺ tells you that even if there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we look at what does it mean to actually do tawbah, look at those. You have to have the shasha'ah. You got to change your lifestyle. You got to change your lifestyle. You got to change everything. فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُهُنْ. So now, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُهُنْ. What is it, بَاشِرُهُنْ? بَاشِرُهُنْ comes from the root بَشَارَ. But the word bashara actually means skin. skin. What does skin have to do with this? So then ayah, whenever in Lugha Arabiya, you would have ziyada fil mabani, ziyadatun fil ma'ani. What does that mean? If you were to have a root of a word, the root is bashara. If you were to add bashara, that actually means there's a mutual act. There are two parties doing one thing. Bashara. Lamasa. There are two people doing something. Lamasa. Got it? There's that sigha, there's that conjugation in the verb lamasa. Indafa'a comes from the root dafa'a. The in the root actually means there's a type of force put in it. You see it?
Yes.
And that's the same thing. Every single addition on the root of the verb actually adds another explanation or another meaning or another addition that actually gives an external and an extra meaning. So the word bashiru, bashir, actually means from the root bashara, the root skin, but the Quran is very high in adab and morality. It didn't go in detail in explaining the relationship and just said skin. If you want to get close to the skin, you can get close to the skin. And then what does it really mean? It was just telling you, you get the picture. Bashiru. You get the picture. The ayat, the adab in the Quran is high. Even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to talk about Sayyidah Maryam, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? That Maryam and Isa, they're basically both Siddiqeen. What about them? كانا يأكلان الطعام. They both ate and drank. What does that have to do with anything? Why would you call someone that eats and drinks divine? What does that have to do with anything? If you eat and drink, that means you go to the bathroom, simple. But the ayah didn't say, but they go to the bathroom. The ayah just wanted to say, if you eat and drink, you understand the picture. Exactly. Would a Lord actually go to the bathroom?
No.
Would a Lord actually feel weakness that he needs rizq? Absolutely not. So that's why the ayat, they have adab, manners. They don't go in details and explaining certain things that are supposed to be covered. So it said, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُهُنْ. Now, بَاشِرُهُنْ. There's a mutual skin relationship. You guys understand it. وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. And the word وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, meaning, and seek what the Lord Almighty had permitted for you. What is that? Permitted for you. What is that? Same thing as the ayah, فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّ شِئْتُمْ. But وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Seek what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted for you. What is that? What is not permitted? To be intimate during the day of Ramadan. 2, when a woman has her cycle, it's haram to be intimate with a wife. 3, do any form of anal relations. Why? Because that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted in a relationship. Even between the husband and the wife. It's actually mal'oon. It's actually something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed. All right? So that's why when you look at وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, and that's another thing. Why is gayism actually forbidden in Islam? Because it's not وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Because it's not seek what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted for you to seek. Why? Because it's actually a form of relations outside of the place of harvest. Harvest? Who's talking about farming here? Harvest? Who's talking about farming here? Who's talking about what was that? It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sorry about that. Hold on, we need to, let's go like that. Someone's lost and they don't know what to do. And let's go. Yeah, we're just going to disable something. All right. So when we look at that ayah, what is that relating to when we said harvest? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Mal'oonun man saqa ma'ahu zar'a ghayri." Look at the adab, the Prophet ﷺ. A person that irrigates somebody else's water is, or somebody that irrigates somebody else's plants and plantations is basically damned. In other words, they're basically going to be expelled from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness and mercy. مَلْعُونٌ مَنْ سَقَى مَاءَهُ زَرْعَ غَيْرِهِ. The one that irrigates somebody else's plantations. That's not talking about plants whatsoever. Pregnant woman. It's not talking about plants whatsoever. Whatsoever. Has nothing to do with any harvest, any plant. And that's the same thing. Why did he say that? Because the ayah also was actually telling you what? فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّ شِئْتُمْ. When the Yahud were saying that there has to be a certain way, a position. It can't be coming from the back. And then the Sahaba were wondering, is that even allowed? So that's why the ayah فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّ شِئْتُمْ, it has nothing to do with from which position. So this ayah, وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, telling you, well, there are certain things that you have to avoid. One, during the day of Ramadan. Two, during the cycle, a woman's cycle. Three, place of harvest, which it has to be vaginal. All right? وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. And eat and drink until it is clear to you the difference between a white line and a black line. Here's what some of the Sahaba understood it. Like Zayd ibn Thabit. What did he do? He got a black thread and a white thread and just hung it next to his bed, and he kept staring at it. And then the Prophet ﷺ actually clarified it to him, min al-fajr, from dawn. What white line and black line? When the sun starts to rise, right before, if you look into the horizon, right, in that horizon, there's something called al-fajr al-kadhib, and there's al-fajr al-sadiq. What is al-fajr al-kadhib, al-fajr al-sadiq? So there's a certain time, like around our time, it's around 2 a.m., where all of a sudden, the horizon, it's like it's almost dawn, it's almost like Fajr time, but then it goes black again. All right? That's al-Fajr al-Kadhib. Al-Fajr al-Sadiq is when you could see in the horizon, it's like a black cloak that brought in the night, and then the day is coming up. And you could see a fine line in the horizon between the cloak of night and day. That's that al-khayt al-abyad min al-khayt al-aswad. When is it talking about? It's not an actual literal black thread and white thread. It's actually from Fajr. ثُمَّ أَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Then complete your fast until the night. What night? So it's not Maghrib, it's night. Well, the Prophet ﷺ actually explained it. That when the Prophet ﷺ actually had 3 main mu'adhineen, Abu Mahdura was 1, 2 was Bilal, and 3 was Ibn Maktoum. Those were the 3 main mu'adhineen. Abu Mahdura was actually the youngest. He was actually a young man. The Prophet ﷺ overhears that he was, like any other young man singing, and they're just having a good timing and singing. And the Prophet ﷺ overhears that he had a good voice, wanted to utilize his good voice for adhan. makes dua for him, and he becomes one of those mu'addinin. All right. So and explain, the Prophet ﷺ explained that when you would hear the adhan, of course, explained it, al-layl is basically the maghrib time. So not like the Shia, where it's the Aysha time, it's actually the maghrib time. So maghrib time is actually marking al-layl, is basically marking al-layl. Layl is night, but night is basically when we're talking about sunset. When we're talking about sunset, that marks the beginning of al-layl. وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Here's another time when intimacy is not allowed. وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. When you're doing i'tikaf. What is i'tikaf? I'tikaf is basically, it can be done at any time throughout the year, but i'tikaf is mainly done during the last 10 days of Ramadan. You can do any time. You can decide you wanted to do i'tikaf during this time as well. But i'tikaf is mainly the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ used to do i'tikaf, especially the last 10 days of Ramadan. What is i'tikaf? He would stay in the masjid, all right, and not leave the masjid except to go home to get probably food, to probably, take a shower and come back. He would stay in the masjid. So what would they do in the masjid? They would only do reading Quran, they tasbih, istighfar, dhikr, that's it. Nothing else. Sleep even in the masjid.
No talking.
No talking, no nothing. They would only talk, maybe, hey, I left my water bottle. Can you please give me the water bottle? That's, limited talk. Not discussing anything else. That's it, i'tikaf. Can women do i'tikaf? They can. They would sleep in the masjid, same thing. They would sleep in the masjid and do the exact same thing. It would be really nice to do i'tikaf here.
Can you do half the time?
You can. It doesn't have to be all the 10 days. You can decide, I want to do i'tikaf for a day, 2 days, 3 days. It doesn't have to be for 10 days. What if she gets her cycle? She can't continue her i'tikaf.
If you had intention for it, you get the deeds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The Prophet ﷺ actually says, "Man hamma bi hasan." If you just have the intention to do just one hasan, and you do it, you will get the 10 deeds for it. Go ahead, Sister Maimuna.
Yeah, I thought when you are in Itikaf, like you don't go home, so you can go home and like.
For necessity only.
Oh.
Yep, for necessity only. So even the Prophet ﷺ would basically put his head inside his home. So Sayyidah Aysha would brush it and then he would go on.
So the brushing was necessary. We have a question. Me, Khadija, and Ayan on the retreat, we forgot to ask you. We watched the dawn and then we prayed the salah al-shuruk. Then when we were done, the sun just started coming
Yep.
up. What's the time? Is it when it's just rising?
Shuruq is not when it's rising. Shuruq is after it rises until it reaches qadr rumh, which basically means almost 20 to 25 minutes after the sun rises. That's when shuruq
That's when we
starts.
pray.
Shuruq. That's when you,
pray the 2 rak'ats.
it doesn't have to be 2. You can pray it up till 11. All right? حين ترمض الفصال, even though scholars have differences of opinions on whether ترمض الفصال is basically that shuruq or whether it's maghrib, but all right, so it's basically when the sun rises by rumh. So when we're looking at timing, we're looking at almost 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, that's it. All right. وأنتم
Before or
after sun rises, right? After sun rises. After Salat al-Fajr, you can't pray. It's makruh. Until shuruq by 15, 20 minutes.
So you have to wait when the sun comes out.
Oh,
You have to wait
absolutely.
20 minutes.
Yep.
Oh.
What about the sunnah if you're late? You can do this.
If you are late, beautiful question. If the sunnah, no, you can't pray during the time of makruh, the sunnah. But the fard, let's say you woke up, all right? And the sun is rising, but I didn't pray my fajr. So in that situation, الفرض is مقدم على المكروه. It precedes the makruh. So in that situation, you can pray your Fajr missed prayer even if the sun is rising. Remember, it's actually hated to pray during sunrise and during sunset. Got it? But you can pray if you had missed your prayer. So let's say the opposite. All right? It's not yet makruh to pray Asr because it's not yet, the sun is not yet yellow. But when the sun is turning yellow, okay, that's when it becomes hated for you to pray. Unless it's a prayer for a reason. So for example, what's a prayer for a reason? So I came into the masjid. I could see that we're in the makruh time. Let's just assume. What is makruh? Makruh means hated. All right. It's during the makruh time. All right. But if you just came into the masjid, there was a reason for you to pray. It wasn't nafil per se. All right. So, but to do extra prayer during that time, makruh time, you can't. You shouldn't. Same thing for Fajr. Unless the Prophet ﷺ, من نام عن صلاة أو نسيها فليصليها إذا ذكرها. Whoever oversleeps a prayer or forgets a prayer, فليصليها إذا ذكرها. Then they would pray it whenever they would remember. So what does that mean? When they would remember, whenever they would recognize that salah. So let's say you woke up and the sun is rising. Should you pray your Fajr? Yes, make your wudu and pray it instantly. Got it?
Mine was, for example, we pray.
But not the sunnah.
So the sunnah is, now Fajr is like, let's say 3:30. And then my husband is praying. I'm joining. He's already started the 2 rak'ahs for Fajr. But you know how you can pray 2 rak'ahs? It's like 4 in the morning, not just the time of makruh.
Get the ajr of praying jama'ah with
I pray
him.
jama'ah with him. After that jama'ah, can I do the sunnah?
No. Oh, hold on. After you had prayed Fajr?
Because Fajr is the sunnah.
Okay, I get what you're saying. So if you had prayed Fajr and then you wanted to pray the sunnah, there are differences of opinions between scholars on whether, even though the sunnah is supposed to be prayed before Fajr, differences of opinions between scholars on whether you can pray Fajr at the sunnah, that is after you had already prayed Fajr, or whether you would have to wait until sunrise to make it up. I'm just saying, differences of opinions between scholars.
So you can do both.
I'm telling you, there are differences of opinions between scholars,
So is it
just so
allowed?
that, is it what?
What those
I'm just, when I say differences of opinions between scholars, I'm letting you know that those two opinions are valid. So if you see Khadija, for example, insisting that she wants to wait, it's a valid opinion. You don't have to fight her on that day.
If I want to pray, you can pray.
On that day, you can choose some, on that day, you can choose some other time. وأنتم عاكفون. Go ahead.
If you can regularly pay but when they overstep,
You can make up the sunnah. You can make up the sunnah. So let's say you didn't have time, all right? You only had time to just pray Fajr Fard, the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr. You didn't have time. If you were to make the sunnah and then the Fard, the sun would be up already. So in that situation, I'll say, don't pray the sunnah. Go and pray the faridah. You'll make up the sunnah later. Got it?
Yes.
Because the fard precedes the sunnah. That's a general rule. All right, let's continue. ولا تباشروهن وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها. So those are the word hudud. The word hudud can actually have a number of different meanings. The word hudud can actually mean limit, and the word hudud can also mean limits in punishment. Right? But this is not the hudud that limits in punishment. So just like, for example, hadd zina. The zina, the punishment for zina is 100 lashes for someone that is virgin, basically never married before, man or woman. And of course, stoning if they have been married before. All right? That's hadd zina. But al-hudud here to mean tilka hududullah, that those are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فلا, the word is تقربوها. Let's see. What are the hudud that we're not supposed to even get near? The word تقربوها means get near. What are the hudud? Number one, الرفث إلى نسائكم. That's number one had. Don't even get near intimacy during the day of Ramadan. What else? وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Now we're just looking for the imperative verbs here. All right? The verbs, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ. So here we go. Even though that's not an imperative one, that's more of an informative. All right? But then وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. So this is an imperative verb. All right? ابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. In other words, this is do not get near. So even if the husband were to get angry and wanted anal relations, we're going to say, no, that's a limit. Don't even get near it. It is a lot more common than you think, by the way. A lot more common than you think. Allahumma musta'an. كذلك يبين الله لكم كذلك يبين الله آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون. So كذلك, what is that? So why are these limits even there? Why are these limits even mentioned? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to, one, يبين الله آياته. He's showing you the signs. Wait a minute. Are regulations and tashri' even part of the ayat? Yes, they are. What is that? Why is that even a question? So when we say tashri', what is tashri'? Tashri' comes from the word shara'a. What is shara'a? What is shara'a? What does the word sharia come from? The word sharia comes from the root shara'a. Shara'a means a spring. Spring, spring of water?
Yeah.
And shara'a also means to start. And shara'a also means to sail. And shara'a also means to have a specific habit. من أحسن الله شرعا. How is that connected to Sharia? Sharia, it's basically a spring of clarity from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sharia is also a spring and a path, because it also means path, of all the prophets that had come from before. شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا. And then what? In Surah Al-Shura. شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا. And then who? And Ibrahim. And then who? Musa, Isa, etc. Right? So what do we got? So Sharia, شرع لكم. Sharia, it's a spring. So when we look at Sharia, it's not this scary image. It's actually supposed to be about a path of a spring. A path of a spring, a path of clarity, a path of purity, a path of purification. That's what Sharia actually means. A path of purity, a path of clarification. لعلهم يتقون. So يبين الله آياته, even though it was actually discussing Sharia, it's basically part of the different, what is the word ayah? The word ayah actually means sign. It could also mean miracle. And the word ayah can also mean a verse in the Quran. So it's a miracle and a verse in the Quran. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even explain and do that tabyin in the ayat? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that bayan to those ayat? Oh, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give ayan a cure, Ya Rabbi. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring about that clarity in the rulings? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. That's the whole secret. Why? Because let's see, what was it saying before? Let's go before and actually see what was it saying before. Let's see. You guys got to connect it. Let's see. The one before it said لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. The one before, after it said لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. What is the difference between لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ and لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ?
hidayah and knowing.
What is the difference? What is taqwa? Hold on. What is taqwa?
Taqwa is staying away from even the halal stuff.
Taqwa, even the halal stuff? Is it really? Let's see. Taqwa, having fear. So, what is the difference between taqwa and rushd? Rushd. Rushd is guidance and hidayah. Let's read the ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat. Read it. Surah Al-Hujurat, the ayah. لعلهم يرشدون. No, in Surah Al-Hujurat, come on, you know it. We'll see, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam. In Surah Al-Hujurat, what was it saying about that Allah زينا في قلوبهم الإيمان? What is it? In Surah Al-Hujurat, come on, you know it.
No, I'm trying to my mind is stuck.
Okay, let's do it. واعلموا أن فيكم here we go. ولكن الله حبب إليكم الإيمان وزينه في قلوبكم وكره إليكم الكفر والفسوق والعصيان أولئك هم الراشدون. All right, so let's do it again. So what is it in Surah Al-Hujurat? حبب إليكم الإيمان. That's number one. حبب إليكم الإيمان, that he made faith beautiful to you. So that's in terms of iman. زينه في قلوبكم. That's another degree. Not only do you want to be a believer, but it's you just find glamour in it. It's so beautiful. He's like, you find your glamour in it. You just find it beautiful to actually be a mu'min. You just don't find anything else more beautiful. زينه في قلوبكم. And زينه not on the outside, but on the inside. زينه في قلوبكم. And then what? It wasn't just you love faith, but you كره إليكم الكفر. He made you hate disbelief. What else? الفسوق. What is الفسوق? الفسوق is basically to commit a sin and be proud about it and be public about it. كره إليكم الكفر والفسوق والعصيان. العصيان is sin. Could be in private, could be in public, but you just don't like it. You don't like sinning. You love faith. أولئك هم الراشدون. Those are the راشدون. النفس المطمئنة. Absolutely.
So if you do something wrong,
نفس المطمئنة. Let's go for النفس المطمئنة in Surah Al-Fajr. What was it? يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك. What is this one? ارجعي إلى ربك. What is this one? حبب إليكم الإيمان. ارجعي إلى ربك. راضية مرضية. What is that? زينه في قلوبكم. راضية مرضية. It's a beautiful zina. What is راضية مرضية? You're content. You're feeling happy. You're feeling satisfied on the inside. You're so happy about it. And that's why زينه في قلوبكم. زينه في قلوبكم. It just became the most beautiful thing to you when you see a mu'min. You just love the appearance of iman. You just love the dhikr. You just love the ibadah. And whenever you don't enjoy at all, not al-kufr, not al-fusuq, not al-asyan, you don't enjoy it. It doesn't even sound fun. When I would say drinking, it doesn't sound fun. When I would say gambling, it doesn't sound fun. Dancing doesn't sound fun. To you, there's something else on the inside. That's a rashid. زينه في قلوبكم. You've got some. The Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith. What did he say in the hadith? What was it in the hadith where he actually said, you would not be a believer حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. They would not be believers unless الهوى. What is الهوى? What you enjoy, what you entertain yourself with, what you love is basically going in parallel with what the Prophet ﷺ had come with. In other words, you only enjoy iman. You only enjoy amal salih. That's a mu'min. And that's why when you look at لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ, that was when it was talking about, let's see this one. That's when it was talking about a different level of a different level of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was a connection of getting near Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the other one, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ, that's a lower level. They're working on it.
So is that like لعلهم where you are إحسان محسنين?
لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ, that's exactly, that's in the level of muhsinin. All right? But لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ is the level of mu'min. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ is a level of mu'min. In where hopefully this will lead them to a level of mu'min, a level of taqwa. Why level of taqwa and not level of, why did it talk about لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ? Because all this, these are limits that no one really recognizes but you and your husband
And your close friends.
and your close friends. You cover up for me, I cover up for you. No one knows all these details but both of us. Who's the most one that knows if that woman is a religious woman or not, or that man is a religious man or not? It's really the wife. Because she knows those private moments. It's really the wife. She knows him. If his wife loves him, you'll know that he's a man that gives her huquq. If she doesn't like him, he's not giving her huquq. And of course, it's so easy to transgress a limit with a person that needs you.
But what if you
It's
love
so
each
easy
other,
to
but it's
transgress a
still not
limit,
pressure?
especially if it's husband. That's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the best of you are the best of their wives. Why? Because it's so easy for a man to abuse a woman's instinct in connecting to her family. It's so easy to abuse a woman's instinct and her physical weakness. It's so easy. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the best of you are the best of their wives. The best of you are the ones that have the highest morality that they practice at home.
Wives to husband.
And wives to husbands, but the Prophet ﷺ emphasized on the husbands as well.
Somali women are feisty. They don't communicate.
I'm not going to say anything about Somali women. You guys are right there. We in Arabic, we say you're pulling my leg. ولا تأكلوا. I'll talk about Oromo. ولا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل وتدلوا بها إلى الحكام. I'm going to translate this first literally, and then I'll say what it means. And don't eat your wealth in transgression and injustice, and bring it to the leaders in order to eat up part of people's wealth in transgression, and you would know. It sounded totally broken, right? Because guess what? This is not to be translated literally. This is a metaphorical wording. So here, ta'kulu is not eat, but the word ta'kulu actually means to contain. All right, what are they containing? So this is what does eating or containing or abusing someone's wealth have to do with the previous ayah? What was the previous ayah? It was talking about Ramadan, and that relates to food and water. So the ayah was basically telling you, listen, containing and not eating and drinking is not only in not eating and drinking food and water, but not also eating or gulping up people's wealth is also part of discipline. So don't think that fasting is all about abstaining from eating and drinking. But fasting also contains that you don't gulp up people's wealth. What is gulp up people's wealth? Something that doesn't belong to you. Somebody else's property. Can you gulp up someone's house? Well, certainly not literally. You're not here, let's go eat up a door, but you're gulping up by actually claiming that this is yours, even though the person might have actually put it in your name, maybe because they couldn't afford to put it in their own name, whatever the reason was. But then you abuse the situation and you actually claim that house to be yours, even though you know that the title is in your name, but you know the matter of the fact is that it's actually theirs. It belongs to that person. See what I mean? فاطمة شوفي حذيفة. What? So when we're looking at that ayah, ولا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل وتدلوا بها إلى الحكام, that actually comes in with the same context that we were talking about. تدلوا بها إلى الحكام. It can happen that there's actually a context for this, that the Prophet ﷺ actually said that you may come to the Prophet ﷺ himself, and each one will lay out their evidences. Here's my evidence, here's your evidence, and then they're laying out those different evidences. And then the qadi, the judge, might actually rule based on the evidences, and that this actually belongs to Zoya. But the reality was, Zoya was not that much of an eloquent person, or probably couldn't afford a good lawyer to advocate for her rights. So the other person, they basically abused that she didn't have a good lawyer to advocate for her. And then what happened? Basically went forward to al-hukam, to the judges, government, whatever it is, and abused the situation. So what happens? لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. What was the story? The story that the Prophet ﷺ had two people come to him, each one lay out his evidences. So the Prophet ﷺ ruled for one and not the other. But then the Prophet ﷺ said, لَعَلَّ بَعْضُكُمْ يَكُونُ أَلْحَنَ بِحُجَّتِهِ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. Some of you might be more eloquent in proving your point more than the other person. So if I had ruled for you on behalf of your brother's rights, then know that I had just given you a share from hellfire. I am just a man. That is the Prophet ﷺ said, I'm just a man. I would just rule based on what I'm hearing. Okay, good. Based on what he's hearing. What is that telling us? That even if the government/court were to rule something and you would win a case, that does not mean, if you know deep on the inside that it doesn't belong to you, you cannot take it. You cannot take it. And even if it was the Prophet himself to give you the rule, you know it doesn't belong to you, you cannot take it. What happens? You would have actually been given and granted a share in hellfire. That's why the ayah said, لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِّنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. So the word لِتَأْكُلُوا, like I said earlier, the word تَأْكُلُوا actually means to eat. But this is giving a metaphor that a person that transgresses the limit in abusing other people's properties is basically exactly similar and not any different when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. Should not be eating and drinking. You should not be doing certain things during the day of Ramadan. You should not get near that. That is not any different from eating people's wealth, from eating people's rights. What is eating? What is a metaphor is supposed to have some kind of a similarity. Eating is when you contain something and no one recognizes it. I eat, you don't even know I ate it. It's all swallowed. You don't even see it. It's all down there. You would only see it when it goes on my weight. Right? When you see those chunks coming up, you're like, oh, you've been overeating. Reduce. Right? So that's why لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِّنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ was basically talking about bil-ithm. You would gulp up, you would contain, you would take people's wealth bil-ithm, in transgression. So live the justice and give people their rights, and especially when you actually know that it doesn't belong to you. So what are the things that don't belong to me? They're number one, is that matters that are known that don't belong to you. Everyone knows, in all religions, they would know that stealing is not good. Number two, matters that are limited within Sharia to tell you that's how much you own and that's how much you don't own. For example, inheritance. This is how much your share is. That's how much his share is. So then, therefore, to go beyond the limits of what Sharia had explained to you as your limits is basically akal amwal nas, if you went beyond. So one is going literally beyond, which is known what all of us know, stealing, you're rooting people's property, that's akal amwal nas. What if the person harmed me in that way? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لا يحب المعتدين فمن اعتدى عليكم فاعتدوا عليه مثل ما اعتدى عليكم. Whoever transgresses the limit on you, you can transgress the same amount, but you as a citizen, you don't have the right to actually go and harm other people's properties because they harmed yours. That's supposed to be a government's job, not yours. That's a government's job. Because if you were to basically do a government's job, then people are not going to stop and transgressing other limits and claiming that they basically had the right to do it. It's going to be endless. You need stability within the society. It's a government's job. So what should I do? Simple. Tell the government. What if it's not Muslim? Even if it's not Muslim. Number three, when we're talking about people's rights, things that even if they were ruled to you, but you already know it doesn't belong to you. Let's say family court here in the US would give you half your husband's wealth if that wealth was actually, let's say, happening or increasing during your marriage. All right, both of you, but it's his wealth. It's not that you were both in a joint bank account and joint working together. She was making 6 and he was making 6 and both of you were putting that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm basically talking about, all right, wealth, income that he is working for and you're not working for. And the government will say, still, you will get half. In that situation, even though Al-Hakim had given you that right, Islamically it would be haram for you to take it.
You return all of it.
You would take the amount, the alimony, if you had, if there was any dain, if there was any debt that he owed you, if there was mahr that he owed you, you would take that. But the rest you don't take. It doesn't belong to you.
What about the kids stuff?
No, child support, that's his responsibility. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
But
All right.
in this country, that it could be reversed. You have to
It would be haram for him to take.
Because it's a responsibility. to
Same
protect
thing.
the kids.
No,
You
no,
go
in
back
this
to
country-
Islam, you go back to the Sharia in order to tell you, let's say the opposite way. Let's say you were making the income, all right? Let's say you were making the income and you bought the house and you were making everything and he was really unemployed. All right? The government will actually give him half your wealth. All right? That's actually haram for him to take. Yes.
If it doesn't return, you just.
It would be haram for him to take, even if the government ruled so. He has to return
to you, to the government.
to you, to
No,
you.
It has to be through the government.
Regardless. In the end, is that it has to be returned to you. If it's your property that was assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's yours. Even if the government were to say give you otherwise, it would be haram. Got it? Now, the other type of property that doesn't belong to you is basically property that is part of a property. What is property part of a property? So for example, when there are certain things that are shared, we share land together. You've got one side and we've got other sides. And there's something called haqq al-shuf'a. So what is that? Let's say we own this building together. It's a joint property. All right. And then I decided that, you know what? I don't want to be a joint holder with you. I want to sell my share. So I'll go and tell Zemzem, hey, you want to buy it? She's like, yeah, I'll buy it. I said, what is your name? Sartu. Sartu says, I don't want to be a joint share with Zemzem. And I say, I don't care. And he'll say, I'll buy your share. You will buy my share, but you don't want to be with Zemzem. But Zemzem is offering me more. You're offering me 300,000, but she's offering me 350,000. Huh? So what should I do in that situation?
She has a right.
She has the right, because it would be shufa. So in that situation, we will bring in basically the people that are specialized in giving us an evaluation of how much the cost is, and tell you, well, that's how much it costs. That way I won't abuse you. They'll say, oh, it's about this much. And that way, that's another joint share, and that's part of that. So when we look at what does it mean to respect other people's properties, even if it's joint property, there are certain limitations that you have to have the adab of respecting certain limits, even if someone might actually offer you more, there are certain limits that you respect because of honor. Adab. Raise your voice, Sartu.
Only if that will only happen to if people are doing it about it,
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole thing. It was basically just telling you, live honor, don't have, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. What is يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ? Shuh is greed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects you, or if you also contain your greed, we all have greed. That's why even little kids, mine, that's the first word they learn how to say.
So inheritance.
That's the first word. Hold on. The first word is mine. Why? Because we are human beings, and even animals. Even animals. I used to work on a ranch. They would recognize, I found it first, and you will see the sheep fighting the other sheep because I found it first. Not only in things, maybe plants on the ground, but even when it comes to wives. Even when it comes to wives, if a ram can have almost 60 wives, believe it or not, right? 60, yep, a ram would have 60. And he would be, if you would bring in another ram in the area, he would consider that, but this is my territory. These are all my wives. How dare you trespass your boundary? And they will go head to head. They will go head to head. Same thing. Even when you're talking about animals, there are certain animals that will not accept anyone else to be in their territory. You see what I'm saying? We as human beings, same thing. There are certain things, it's like we understand it. It's part of our jibillah. It's part of our own instinct. It's mine. It's part of our nature. We want to contain. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling, wait a minute. وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed you with learning how to contain the shuh, your own greed, then you would be part of those that were successful. In other words, the biggest success is when you contain those bad deeds, bad behaviors that you are actually finding within yourself. There's on the inside. What are the bad things? One is dhulm, the opposite of the four elements. Justice, the opposite of it is dhulm. The opposite of sabr is what? Is al-jasha. Jasha basically means greed. Shahwa.
Oh,
That's the
Shahwa.
opposite of patience.
No, there are a number of different things because it depends on what patience you're talking about. There's a shahwa, there's a al-ghadab as well.
I have other very
Al-ghadab,
patience.
al-ghadab is part of that, and where just easily fire really fast. Fire really fast. Don't
So
need
we have dhul, then we have
al-ghadab,
then we have shahwa.
shahwa and jahan. Exactly. There's actually a whole lecture that I did just on the different things. Yep.
Can you share?
Yeah, I will. inshallah. I will.
What's the opposite of qadab? The good side of qadab is what?
The good الحلم. The الحلم is the opposite of al-ghadab. What is al-hilm? Forbearance.
How does pride come into that? 'Cause it's very
Of
hard to
course.
have forbearance when you have
Pride.
pride in you.
Pride is all about exaggerating yourself, exaggerating yourself, exaggerating in seeing that you know the best. You are just beyond. You are the most beautiful. You are the most powerful. You are all these different things. That's pride. That brings in the pride. It's basically when you see yourself the center of the world.
That's pride.
That's pride.
Okay.
All right? The center of the world.
Because qadab
When
doesn't come. It's actually
Al-ghadab,
other
who
diseases.
al-ghadab creates pride because you would exaggerate viewing that you are beyond all, and you would consider anybody transgressing your area, your comfort zone, as transgressing your territory. So your pride comes in, and that brings in that anger,
And that's
because you
arrogance.
would consider that person transgressed your territory. And
Is
that's
it
when you
same as
start
arrogance?
acting, that's when a person starts acting like an animal, and where they would have a different voice. They would have, they could even see their anger. You could see their hitting, violence. They would start fighting, and even their hair stands up.
I know that movie.
Yeah. La ilaha illallah. You know that movie? Wallah Azim, you could see, in animals, they would even have a different smell. You've got animals that would have that would produce a certain scent or a certain odor. Their claws would just, start, and their voices and all that. They're just, or cats, and you could see it in animals, and changing colors. Their faces would turn red. We have some similarities with animals too. Our faces would turn red, would turn colors. Our teeth would come out. Right, man, looks so scary. All right, so we'll end right here. I was really hoping to do 2 pages. Sorry, you guys.
That's good.
It's your fault. You got me off track.
That's good.
So inshallah, it's 8:19 right now, and my son is telling me he's hungry. So we'll continue inshallah next week.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Oh, does anybody have any questions before we leave? No. Well, they were actually asking on the spot, which is good, alhamdulillah. Got Sister Zainab is here, and another Zainab. Mashallah, got a number of Zainabs. So next week, you know what? I was really hoping to actually finish this page and the following page, and I really prepared it. The second page, we're going to talk about something called Jihad al-Talab and Jihad al-Dafa'. A very big discussion between scholars. Inshallah, we can talk about some of those things, and also some other things about Sirah, Surah Hudaybiyah, and stuff. So join us next week, inshallah. Any questions for today?
Assalamu alaikum. I sent a text. Can you check it?
Oh, you sent it was a text. So yeah, it is recorded. It is recorded, alhamdulillah. So yes, it will be available, inshallah.
No, I have a question, but I don't want it to.
Oh, sure. It's okay. You can send it in private, inshallah.
All right, inshallah, jazakallah.
Inshallah. Oh, mashallah, we had a lot of people actually watching this. Just this hour. Okay. Go ahead, my dear. All right. So we'll continue next week, inshallah. And Allah barik fiku. And Allah yahfadhku. Any questions for me? I guess I was
So you
answering.
ask us, you say the difference between taqwa and afwa. You never went.
No, not التقوى and العفو are not the same.
You're not the
العفو.
same. You only talk to us about the repentance and the condition of repenting.
Repenting.
What about
لا العفو generally is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismisses your sins. العفو, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismisses your sins, not that they weren't there, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you recognize that they're there, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just tells you, it's like, yes, I know it's there, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismisses your sins. It's different than an istighfar or al-maghfirah. Al-maghfirah is like wiping it, but this is dismissal. Al-afu is higher than al-maghfirah. All right? Al-afu is higher. What is al-afu? Al-maghfirah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept you seeking forgiveness. But al-afu, it's like, no, despite all that, just go. Al-afu, a whole dismissal. Khalas. All right? Al-afu is even a higher level. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yafuna, yarfi anna, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gather us.
What's the difference between Allah and al-afu and I remember you say that
Two different things.
Forbearing.
Forbearing.
You know you can
Forbearing. So despite people transgressing the limit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is halim. So he will still, even if somebody is committing all the sins, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still give them air to breathe. Will still give them water, food, those different things. He's halim. All right. And that's part of his rahmah. All right. But al-afu, that's al-afu in the akhirah. All right. Al-afu al-akhirah. Not that al-hilm can't be in al-akhirah, but al-hilm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you also chances. Give you chances. It's all within the same arena. What was that? Al-afu, absolutely. Al-afu is only reserved for those that believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, and my rahmah wasi'at kulla shay. But then what? فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا, and it will only be granted for those that believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Think of it like this. You work, and just like in the surah, you go and work. I hire you to work for me. For example, I hire you to work for me. But then you were on the cash register, and I come at the end of the day, and I say, so Sartu, what did you sell today? And I look at the money, and I discovered that the money you gave it to someone else. You can't come and tell me, hey, I was working for 8 hours today. Where's my paycheck? You just gave the money to someone else. What are you talking about? Right? You gave the money to someone else. So how is it that you want me to pay you for it? That's the same thing. If the person worked for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell them, well, the people you worked for, or the aliha, or the gods that you had worshipped, let them reward you for the deed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling, even for a Muslim, that's why أول من تسعر بهم النار, the first to actually enter hellfire are who? It's a scholar. It's a person that was reading Quran. It was a mujahid. It was a person that was giving donations. Why? Because they didn't do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Were they doing good deeds? They were doing good deeds. But they were doing it for what? That one, so they would be called as scholars, and the other one, so they would be called as qara, and the other one, so they would be called as pioneers, or shuja'an, or heroes, or whatever. So at the end of the day, whether the person is Muslim or whether the person is not Muslim, you did it for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the reward is not going to come from Allah. That's why sincerity, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. All the deeds are basically just and exclusively supposed to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أغنى الشركاء عن الشرك. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept anyone associating any partners with him. That's it. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all. And جزاكم الله خيرا. And let's see if anybody has any questions here. حبيبة قلبي زينب, الله يرضى عنك يا ربي. So inshallah, we'll end right here because Hudayfa, he's telling the mom, I'm hungry.